And we are live. What is up, crew? We have the full house tonight. We will get into all this good stuff. Let's get into it first. We'll talk about this first. And the Skeptics community has already put out a video 3 days ago. It's already got 44,000 views. Man, it's a very narrow-minded 19 minutes. Shows a couple very selected clips, which don't accurately portray the whole picture. I encourage people to really go to Spotify. It's free to sign up for an account there. I just went ahead and did it just to listen to this podcast. I had, been protesting against doing so for a while, but I finally went and did it. And you know what? Go to Spotify if you can. And it's number 1945 on Spotify. I'm going to bring that over to this video here. Where were we? Oh, this one right here. Well, let's listen to a little bit of this. I guess I don't know if it's really worth it. Eric ended up blocking her on Twitter. On Twitter, he blocked her on Twitter because she was just not really adding anything intellectual to the conversation. It's kind of portrayed him as this one part of this experience where Eric's talking about these people who've been calling him, and Sam Harris apparently has these people too, who are like UFO insiders who are promised they're going to fly him out to Colorado Springs. And I'll show the video.
Because we're talking theoretically, you're talking about your understanding of dimension.
Because I thought it was a smoke screen that we were using to do aerospace engineering projects. I thought it was like Operation Fortitude or Operation Bodyguard. Right. And so it's like, okay, please don't bother me with your sci-fi stories. It's space opera, for the same reason that I don't go into a Scientology center and spend all my time thinking about Xenu. I'm not going to spend all my time worried about space opera.
And what changed?
Meeting an enormous number of very sober, very grown-up people who seem to...
What's going on? I can't hear this. Oh, I got the...
to be changed, alter, and believe that this is real. I have met an enormous number of people now who had personal firsthand, like sober people who've had crazy firsthand encounters. I don't understand how they're doing this as actors. Very often it's unwanted. It ruins their lives. It's sad. I ended up in San Marino at Lou Elizondo's invitation. Then Lou couldn't come, so I ended up speaking in Lou's place at a UFO meeting. It was crazy. But I met so many people who were just like, Eric, let me explain my experience to you. And I'm just not prepared for these highly detailed stories that have so much similarity one to the next. Like the Skinwalker Ranch thing on the History Channel looks incredibly junky, put out by Prometheus Entertainment. I know Brandon Fugel, the owner of the ranch, and I know Eric Bard. We keep talking via phone. Eric Bard is like almost the only other person who has some idea of what differential forms are, tensor analysis is. He's a sober, normal human being sitting out there on a ranch trying to figure out what the hell he's looking at. I don't think he's lying to me. Sam Harris and I were both contacted saying that there's a disclosure planned and there's big updates and we need you to communicate this news to the world.
There's disclosure about a specific technology.
About something. More or less the way this works, it doesn't matter who you talk to. Something's huge. I can't talk to you about it because you don't have clearance. But we're going to fly out to Colorado Springs and we're going to show you some stuff and you're never going to be the same. Right? Like, okay, I'm on standby. My process, Joe, is that I'm very open-minded, but I have a very strong filter before I'll say, yeah, that's true, that's real.
Okay.
That freaks people out. It's like, why are you even talking to these people? Well, because I know the history and you don't. So I was open to this. Sam was open to this. And it's Lucy in the football every goddamn week. When am I headed out to Colorado? Oh, you're going to be met by a car and you're going to be blindfolded and you won't know where you are. Like blah, blah, blah. Okay. This week, next week, the week after. Oh, no, if something's come up on the hill, things are getting crazy. We're going to be talking to some very big people. I can't talk to you right yet. So that's been my weird life now, a part of it for like 3 years. I don't know how
For
long.
3 years, they've been telling you that they're going to release this.
Well, yeah, and it's always pushed out.
So apparently Weinstein has been in continuous contact with someone for the past 3 years who claims that at any moment Weinstein is going to be flown to Colorado Springs to be shown presumably actual evidence of extraterrestrials any moment now. His bags are packed, ready to
Sorry, this is a very weak point to like for her to focus on and stuff. And I just want to point out that this is, you know, she takes a lot of time calling him out is this, you know, idea of the intellectual dark web. And the idea that, you know, to call out intellectuals, you have to really get into nitty gritty on the intellectual stuff, which this isn't the intellectual stuff. This is the issue of the evidence for alien UFOs. And, you know, he said he in the very clearly, she asked all these questions and, you know, it's like, obviously you didn't watch the whole interview with Eric Weinstein, because if you did, you would have noticed that, you know, he addressed this at several points. You know, the first start of the video gets off to a rocky start. You know, it's kind of interesting to get into it if you want to get into it, because Joe Rogan asks him about Bob Lazar and Weinstein deflects a little bit on the whole question. And I'm not sure if it's because he hasn't really done the thorough research on Bob Lazar. If anyone wants to talk to someone who has, so Solar Marshall has been one of my, you know, leads on that case. He introduced me to John Lear and a number of other people who are very high up and close to the original Bob Lazar case, which have led us to some really interesting inside sources of information on a lot of the network that's still taking up in the mainstream media and really deflecting a lot of the scientists away from this topic, which I can talk about. Eric talks a little bit about this when he gets into the military research on anti-gravity. People are surprised when you talk about anti-gravity. It's like a taboo topic. It's ridiculous. And of course, you know, what do we mean by anti-gravity is an issue of scientific and physical debate and definitions that we call it propellantless propulsion or alternative propulsion. And I've worked with, as people who are new to this channel may not be aware, altpropulsion.com. If you go to altpropulsion.com, I've hosted this since the very start. I was part of the team that, you know, thought about this during the early part of COVID when the Estes Park Propulsion Conference hosted by what's his name? Estes Park Conference anyway. It was held on Zoom for the first time because of COVID, and so we got the idea from Estes Park to host the Zoom conference on to host a conference on propulsion on Zoom. And let me just see. This is Hal Fern. Yeah, Hal Fern is one of the physicists who worked with this, but the guy who put it all on is what is his name? I'm gonna die when it hits me. Someone out there knows. Let's see. I'll do a quiz for the audience to see how much you guys know. If you can name the person who puts on the propulsion conference at Estes Park, because then you're really shows that you're into propulsion science and do your research and homework on propulsion. Deep propulsion science and technology, which I do. I just I'm drawing a blank on his name. Woodward. Come on, James Woodward. That's it. I thought of it a second before you posted it, Charlie. So yeah, Charlie definitely does his research and his homework on propulsion science. So definitely look into the number of people and the past events that we've done here, and the number of propulsion scientists that we've tracked out of the woodwork just by going through the literature and doing the actual research, and actually went and interviewed these people and brought them on the channel. And I helped as part of this. We went and investigated every single claim of an effect or propellantless propulsion, and investigated it. And we also have other independent laboratories replicating or attempting replications of many of this technology. So this is an anti-gravity community, and we've attracted DARPA and MIT and many other top institutions with the research and the people that we've assembled and put together. Of course, there's a number of people that have refused and not come to APEC and have stayed out of the limelight. Woodward, I don't think he is actually, he doesn't need APEC. Woodward's got his own conference and he's in his own league, and I definitely encourage people to go and look into these other people doing these other propulsion conferences, because we're not the only ones. And Eric Weinstein's not the only scientist and mathematician who's hasn't just totally given up on the idea that of something beyond rockets and something beyond propellant-based fuels to get us to the stars. And he talks a lot about this, the military research into anti-gravity. And, it's interesting that he talks about this Ed Witten thing, and I'm not sure where he got that information from, because, I've been researching a lot of this stuff, and then I came along and I've been talking about Wheeler and DeWitt and the work, the theoretical work that Wheeler and DeWitt were doing, the metallurgy work that Wheeler was doing, and how it might have related to UFO metals. A lot of things that Eric Weinstein didn't get into, like it from bit. John Archibald Wheeler was this metallurgist and quantum theorist back, and relativist. Also trying to unify general relativity with quantum field theory back in the 50s and the 60s, even in the 70s. I mean, he died in 2008, and he worked pretty solid up until his 90s on all this stuff. But he was Richard Feynman's theoretical advisor. Another interesting thing I wanted to point out was, Scott Adams did a little delve into UFOs, and of course he found the Bob Lazar stuff. Did a short he watched Jeremy Corbell's film. He said it kept him up at night, and then he started Googling some stuff, and he makes a bad comment though, right at 20-minute mark, if you go here, and he says that, oh, who would hire a 20-year-old to be part of some top secret program? When is that? And he kind of thumbs his nose at it. He talks about Einstein, but he's obviously not aware of the story of Richard Feynman. Richard Feynman was recruited out of Princeton graduate school program in 1943 by Robert Oppenheimer, who was looking for a lot of qualified, really advanced students. And Feynman was recognized for his genius, and was recruited out of there, being born in 1918. That would make him 25 at the time of his recruitment into the most top secret physics research program that was going on in the world at the time, which was the Manhattan Project, 1943. So yeah, there you have it. They do, in fact, hire 25-year-olds who show, high aptitude, and they usually recruit them out of grad school, during grad school out of these top universities. Yes. This is a trend that we see in a lot of other cases as well. There's a number of secret societies and stuff that tap people out of their graduate year of school and other stuff as well. So that transition period between graduating undergrad and graduate school, first year graduate school, is a good way to spot talent. And they say that our universities produce 174 of these people every year that need to be watched. Well, we have to then come up with ways to identify and track those types of people, and that's just a general part of what they would do. We've seen what they do when you look at the global surveillance documents that were leaked by Edward Snowden, and you really studied the network architecture of the data collection servers and systems that they have on creating a timeline of everything you've ever posted on Facebook, whether you were deleted or not, and it's backed up somewhere on some NSA drive and all those weird things. But yeah, it's pretty nuts. So yeah, just be careful what you post and what you get into, and definitely do your research and your homework before you say things like, oh, they don't hire 20-year-olds. Even 30-year-olds. Well, a 39-year-old ran the program. His name was J. Robert Oppenheimer, born in 1904. That would make him 39 in 1943. So he was the director and the leader, the bandwagon leader of the whole top secret physics program for the Manhattan Project. So he was 39 and Feynman was 25. So that's important stuff to look up. The important thing is that Lazar claimed that his position was the senior staff physicist, and you can go find the interview where he claims that senior staff physicist. So you don't get to be a senior staff physicist without an extensive curriculum vitae, and you don't get that being 25. You're in your 20s. You don't get that till your late 30s if you're really well published. So a lot of physicists and mathematicians do a lot of their best work in their 20s, actually. So yeah, 43 also, people were a lot more mature than they are now. We don't have fully grown men, still acting like children. So yeah, let's talk more about this whole thing, because Weinstein was on this podcast with Joe Rogan, and definitely encourage people to go and listen to the whole thing. He starts asking him about Bob Lazar, and then Weinstein kind of side rails. He doesn't really answer and get into the Bob Lazar thing. And I don't really want to get into the Bob Lazar thing. I think the whole Bob Lazar story cannot be told without one key person in the whole Bob Lazar picture, and that's Gene Huff. And I've been trying to get an interview with Gene Huff for years now, and Corbell's never interviewed him. It would be amazing if he did, but man, I'd love to get the real Bob Lazar story out, and I think that guy's the key to it. But anyways, enough with the Bob Lazar. Let's talk the real physics. I don't want to talk about any of the socio-political stuff either that he gets into after that he kind of deflects to and goes on this tangent with. It comes back around 44 minutes. So go to the 44-minute mark. This is a 4-hour long podcast discussion. So there's a lot of stuff covered here. If you go back to 44 minutes, he gets into specifically the stuff on All right, so I have this all linked up. So he gets into two people. So the two people is the Wittens. That's the father-son team, and then the other team is the husband-wife team, which is Bryce and Cecil DeWitt. And Bryce and Cecil DeWitt, he doesn't really go into the deep connection that they had with John Archibald Wheeler, but he goes into the gravity conference, the secret gravity conference in 1957 at, of all places they chose. It's weird where they choose for these top secret programs sometimes. University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill was where they ran this conference out of. And Richard Feynman actually attended, top theoretical physicist in the world, really, at that time, in 57. And he attended under a pseudonym, Mr. Smith, believe it or not. And it's interesting that he would do secret gravity research under a pseudonym in 1957 at this university, where theoretical physicists and teacher, professor, and husband and wife team were doing a lot of this research. But the father and son team were also interesting, and Louis Witten tells some interesting tale. Something that's interesting, it's not in here, right? So you could tell that Weinstein, I think Weinstein, if I'm not mistaken, Eric, you got this information from this article by Brett Tingley, which was posted on the Drive back in 2019. So this was covered, the father-son team that did this anti-gravity research was covered by this. And let's actually I want to get into and play this clip. I'm going to stop this, and I want to actually play this clip for people. All right, ready?
Stick to 2 or 3 minutes. I'm also, however, going to tell you very little about my personal life. The first astrophysics symposium not only started this field of relativistic astrophysics, but it ended a chapter, which is a sort of interesting small chapter in the history of relativity. I'm referring to the worldwide craze that lasted for about 10 years in the discovery of anti-gravity. And I bring that in because that impacted on my life quite considerably. In the middle 1950s, I found myself after a different, I should say, youth than one might expect, employed by the Martin Company, now the Lockheed Martin Company, which was mentioned by the dean earlier. I had a PhD in physics, which I got shortly after World War II at Hopkins. At that time, Hopkins was still building the best diffraction gratings in the world. And they were measuring more atomic energy levels than anybody else in the world. And there was only one theoretical physicist on the faculty, and he was doing statistical mechanics, which was the subject of my thesis. In the mid-1950s then, I found myself employed at the Martin Company with a rather weak PhD, I would say, at the age of about 35, with a few children that I was interested in raising. And there was a vice president of ideas. That was not his title, but his function was to bring the company into new eras. The company was building airplanes and building rockets. It ultimately built the Titan rocket, which was used for many space vehicle flights. And the vice president had the idea, which was to him a wonderful idea, to develop anti-gravity. Of course, when he tried the idea in public, you can imagine the greeting he received by these scientists. So he said to himself, "Those poor bastards, I'll show them." he was vice president of a big company with a lot of money behind them, and they made a lot of money in those days. And the overhead rate was perhaps 150 to 200% of, and for a contract, which was cost plus, they were allowed to use 10% of the cost of the contract to do research. So he had the bright idea he was going to start a fundamental research laboratory in which anti-gravity would be discovered. I was a new employee, but a PhD in physics, and I was assigned to the new laboratory to discover anti-gravity, and I was told that's my assignment. Well, I said, I'll start by studying general relativity. And I did. I started by studying general relativity all by myself, no teachers, no colleagues, just Peter Bergman's book, which was, in retrospect, it was a very good book to study for me at the time because I knew no differential geometry. It was not the book one would pick today, I think, but it was a good book then. And I was helped by the fact that at that time, Jim Anderson started the seminar program at Stevens. And that's where I learned relativity between the book and Stevens. For example, when I was at Stevens, if I had heard Charles say that black holes were a good sink for entropy, I would go home and find out what he's talking about. And so I would learn about entropy and black holes, and that black holes were a good sink for entropy. And if I learned that Roger said that energy was not localized, I would go home and find out why energy wasn't localized and so forth. And so I learned relativity, and eventually I think I got there. However, on the way, there were some strange incidents. I had to give a couple of lectures. The Astronautical Society, the American Astronautical Society, was just founded because astronauts were beginning to go up in space, and they asked me to give a talk on anti-gravity. So I gave a talk which was to an audience assembled about the size of this room, but there was no standing room left after the audience came in. And I told a little bit about space contraction and time dilation, and that had to do with the metric, and I was interested in curved space and so on and so forth. And then during the question period, they said, "What are you doing about anti-gravity?" And I said, "Well, I'm not against gravity." And I told him that there was no serious scientist in the world studying something that he would call anti-gravity. During the time after my talk, several people came to me and said, "You had a big audience today. If you come next year, you won't have 25 people." And I said to myself, good, that was my aim. The same thing happened in Seattle. I won't go through those things. The same thing happened in Seattle. But you would be amazed at the number of people who know science, who know the mistakes that Newton made and the mistakes that Einstein made, and they have it right. I would get a person like that at least once a week for many weeks. That happened. Some of them were very simple ideas. The simple ideas are always hard to combat. I'll give you an example in a moment. Some were very difficult and complicated ideas, and they were obviously wrong by the second law or the first law of thermodynamics. They were easy. But suppose somebody comes to you and says, I have a rock of bismuth that demonstrates anti-gravity. What do? There was a vice president of the Martin Company who brought that up. He said, I read about a guy in Indiana who says the rock of bismuth. I said, it's nonsense. He said, how do you know it's nonsense? I said, there's no rock of bismuth that's anti-gravity. He said, how do you know there's not an isotope of bismuth that shows anti-gravity. Well, how do you know? What do you say to that? You have to test every atom of bismuth in the world. I mean, it's impossible. Well, there were lots of incidents of that type, but the power of a vice president of a big company is so great that the reason, I will answer Josh's question, the reason there was a laboratory at Wright Field was to find out what we were doing and to help us do it. And I got a contract from Wright Field to do gravity, which I did very happily. Just as an aside, I'm essentially finished because it only lasts.
You're moving at 20% speed of light.
Okay, I'll go faster. Where was I? Anyway, the laboratory was started because of the propaganda generated by my vice president. And I want everybody who talks sort of blows his own horn a little bit. So I will say that in my last report to Wright-Patterson, which you probably don't have anymore, I made the study had to do with conformal transformations. I made the remark that if somebody travels with acceleration, he will see particles. You'll see that in the final report, which of course became a very, I didn't make the calculation of how many particles he would see, unfortunately, but nevertheless, I knew that he would see particles. Well, thank you very much. I will perhaps privately give you some more examples if you wish, but I am slowing down.
Well, there you have it. That is the video that that's the video that Eric Weinstein was referring to. Didn't actually show the whole thing on Joe Rogan in the interview, but he did talk about a lot of these other leads, which I went and looked into a number of these things and did some further research follow-ups on this, specifically this Research Institute for the Advanced Studies, or RIAS, in Maryland, which he mentions and brings up also on the show. Now, RIAS was started and officially, founded in 1955 by George Bunker. So George Bunker wasn't mentioned by name in that little speech we talked about. He talked about this maverick guy who had a lot of money and was head of the program that put him in charge. But that guy was actually George Bunker, president of Martin. And he had that goal of constantly pushing the envelope on aerospace development and science. So he was totally, into this whole idea of anti-gravity. Even if the scientific community was against it, he was going to find some scientists and really get them to look into it and come up with ways that they could figure this out. And hey, thanks. Shout out to Red Panda Koala, who said he's been looking forward to the stream. Heck yeah, this is all good. This is great stuff, man. We're diving into like the origins of like real theoretical research into anti-gravity and what was the basis for a lot of the research that's been done into UFOs, which the public really is, not aware of. It's declassified. It's unclassified. It's out there. It's just so obscure that you'll never find it doing searches for it. And they hide it from you, just like they blacklist channels like mine because we talk about, we don't have censorship on what we're allowed to talk about or get into here. And we touch on subjects that sometimes the skeptic community aren't quite ready to deal with, So, anyways, this is a very interesting article. I encourage people to go, if they haven't already read this whole thing and know the whole story and the history of, George Bunker. And he kind of told it there, but it's important information on the history of it. But also, if you look up, it's not included and not mentioned in here is the issue of Louis Witten's early work, because he didn't just start. This was apparently the work that he was doing for RIAS starting in 1955. Was this whole this is when they really began the interest in anti-gravity. But actually, Witten began working for, according to his interview with Louis Witten, oral interview. Yeah, AIP, right? I think this is done. Yeah, Don Rickles and Salisbury. Dean Rickles and Donald Salisbury were amazing physicists, if you guys are aware of them, and they interviewed Louis Witten on this on oral history, which is in the Niels Bohr Library here on AIP.org. I'll post that link right now in the comments so people can check that out. So yeah, go to check out that oral history on AIP. But if you just do a Control F and do Martin Company, right? Control F, Martin, right? He says he got out after he got out of the army in 1946. This is Witten speaking. He worked for Glenn L. Martin Company on pilotless aircraft, which used his electronics training. So pre-PhD. So that he tells the story as if like he just went and started working for Lockheed Martin. No, Lockheed Martin sent him to school to get his PhD in physics so that he could study this stuff for them. He was already doing classified work on early like drone technology back in 46, which is amazing. I didn't know that they were working in building drones that early on. But yeah, this is real. When you find a guy like Witten, you've hit the jackpot as far as an intellectually. That's a Bob Lazar. That's, when you identify, maybe there's 10 of these people that come out of our universities every single year. Well, you need to find and identify them and who they are. But a number, it's got to be more than that. The need of new people in black programs is always advancing, and they prefer a lot of people out of the military. They send you out of the military. They recruit you into a company right out of the military, and then they send you to grad school or other places for further training or whatnot. So this is very often what happens. But there's a long history. So he gets into some of the stuff. LaSalle. Yeah, LaSalle was a very real mathematician. If you want to look up the history of mathematicians, J.P. LaSalle, he was a real serious mathematician at RIAS on the mathematics side. So there were two sides of RIAS, which is the Research Institute of Advanced Studies that they founded in 1955. This is post PhD. This is when they started the gravity research programs. Right around it says Glenn Martin started this in 1955. Now, other people talk about or allude to a breakthrough in 1954, such as Stephen Greer, I think, and also my friend Michael Schratt have referred to 1954 as being this breakthrough year, and that rumors were going around, and this is the reason that George Bunker was super interested in this technology. Now, the company that was working on that may have been a little different, but you also have to recall that this is the father-son team. Okay, so George Bunker, by this time, 1955, he got his PhD, and he started training his son in doing a lot of the theoretical physics, and Ed Witten ended up becoming one of the, he's just a master of theoretical physics because he was trained by this really smart dad from a young age to just be like a master of physics. So yeah, that's the father-son team with Glenn L. Martin Company. But Martin also, they also funded this whole, Eric talked about this too, and led me on to this. I had heard of Bryce DeWitt, and I knew that he was connected to the secret college through Diane Walsh Pasulka's book, American Cosmic, and I wanted to get into this whole idea of this whole 1957 quantum gravity meeting. This was the Copenhagen one, and Bryce. This was in. This was later on. This is not this is not the one. We want to talk about the other. The other meeting, the January 1957 meeting at Chapel Hill. Chapel Hill, North Carolina. So yeah, we want to talk about this. He mentions Bondi, who was Herman Bondi, who was ended up doing a lot of really interesting papers that he drops and talks about on what was the thing that he was talking about, the Bondi mass and negative mass. Okay. And also, but he didn't mention the sticky bead argument thing, which I thought was interesting because apparently he credits the whole sticky bead argument to Feynman, which is the basis for what would be Weber bars, because Weber studied under Weber studied out of this, I believe. That's if he was under Bondi, George Weber, I think his name was. Weber bars. So this is a Joseph Weber. Okay, so physicist Joseph Weber. This was another U.S. Army guy that they went and sent to school to get degrees in physics and stuff. And his whole thing became gravitational wave detection, and he ended up developing, masers and lasers during the 1960s, which was the real big heyday for a lot of laser research and laser technology. So late 1950s, they're studying all this gravity stuff. They realized, hey, we may not have the technology for some of this stuff yet. So they really focused on a lot of laser stuff. They know that they didn't have the technology because you look in 1971 at things like Project Outgrowth. And came out in 1970s, this study that was done by Edwards Air Force Base, Air Force Rocket Propulsion Laboratory on major propulsion developments. And they were really looking to a lot of propulsion to orbit by ground-based lasers. So this was the original concept idea. And they later picked an interesting university to help this research once they had developed the lasers capable of doing this for the U.S. Navy. They were trying to, find someone who would do the research for this, and they went to to keep it real secret, as usual, they went to a college called Rensselaer Polytech. Rensselaer Polytech Institute. And they went and got a team of scientists together from Rensselaer Polytech, and they got them in a think tank going and to talk about, these ideas of, ground to orbit using lasers. And so they got working on it out of Rensselaer Polytech, and these guys became the dudes. Now, something you will not find online, in fact, the you could buy copies of it online until, you know, someone went and bought every single copy of the book out. But I'll show you a glimpse inside the book right now. Let me just go to my vault and find it. All right, shared with me. And this is the, yes. Okay. Give me a second to find this. It's in a big vault of information that we have on anti-gravity, accumulation of all the top researchers that we've ever collaborated with that have agreed to collaborate with us on information sharing. So this is a massive, like, underground file sharing exchange for some of the top anti-gravity people and physics people in the country who are working on this right now. And let me just go through and find the Lightcraft stuff. Jesus. Bravo. Okay. So let me find the big book. This is the one. So this is I'm not going to show you the inside of this book. This was declassified. It says declassified and it's post dated to 2025. So it's not due to be declassified until 17th of October 2025. In fact, we tried to contact Lake Marabou and we found out that he's under NDA and can't discuss anything about his work until 2027. So 2 years even after this book declassifies, there's even more information that is still classified on this type of stuff. So this is what you want to look for when you find a scientist, you know, who wants to give you technical information on a topic. This is the kind of stuff you look for, man. Bob Lazar, I'm so sorry, even with his new book, with the exciting sound of, you know, what he saw while he worked inside of Area 51. I'm sorry, man. We have real stuff. We have, you know, the 1979 NASA study on field resonance propulsion, and right in the document, right in the foreword, it says UFO propulsion. I mean, UFO research. So they're doing propulsion. Alan Holt, working for NASA, the scientist, doing UFO research on field resonance propulsion concept. Go look this up. You find this on the NASA website. This is nasa.gov. Here you go. Here you go, Skepchick. Welcome to the deep end of the pool. Go back to the weeds. I swear, it's like these skeptics, they'd love to hang out in the shallow end of the pool and just pretend like the argument's this thing, and then, you know, do a little hit and run on one subject and then move on to the next before they can really, you know, get into it. And they're just like keeping their school of fish in the shallow end of the pool and saying there's nothing out here but the weeds, man. And we got to just stick together and stay in the weeds. Nah, man, we got to venture out to the deep end. That's like my analogy. Well, there's a lot of NASA acronyms too, because, you know, hey, we're studying, you know, UFOs for the first time with this new panel that they put together that's just come out now, and they act like this is the first UFO study that NASA's ever done. And man, it's just not, dude. It's just not. here's the study. You go. There's the link, people. Anyways, yeah. So even more interesting is when you get into the references and the bibliographies, because then you find more stuff. Okay, so large-scale wind tunnel tests of circular plan-form aircraft peripheral jet for lift, thrust, and control. Ames Research Center, 1963. This Tolhurst. So maybe look into some of the other work that these guys have done. So this laser light and these plasmas, so it's all about laser and the ability of lasers to generate plasmas in atmospheres is really the basis of what a lot of this technology is about. And that's interesting to discuss because this really happened. And I've been adding stuff and really revising a lot of the research history summary that I put together here for my presentation. You know, I took out some of the stuff on dirigibles and balloons right before my summer presentation, and then I had to go back and find the old copy edit and put some of this stuff back in and include some new research with balloon stuff because of the incident that happened, you know, during the Super Bowl. And wanted to point out that, you know, MIT did this flying powered planes with no moving parts. It was the first powered plane flight with no moving parts. And this was in 2018, they claim that. But I'm not sure if they ever shut off the engine in this experimental aircraft that was built by Luigi Roda and Edward Farrow, or if this was ever flown in 1913. But this is early experiments with these ion wind effects that they had discovered in these electric wires. And these guys were running a lot of experiments, including building airplanes that could fly potentially with ion wind effects. And this was, you know, 100 years before MIT did it, which is kind of weird where this technology went and why no one really did anything with it. It's just hard to get people to pay attention to escape the norm in everyday life to explore some of these things. Thomas Townsend Brown discovered this effect apparently in 1928, although, you know, Farrow and others show that, you know, other people like Tesla were onto this even beforehand. And Brown was convinced that it was, you know, a gravity potential and that it wasn't ion wind. He tried to, you know, for years, you know, he tried to get this, you know, out to like get people to take this seriously. He would go and what happened is the military, they listened to a lot of things that Thomas Townsend Brown said. They told him that he was a crackpot. His ideas wouldn't work because he was too vocal. He didn't have the right personality and the right ideas, so that for the clearances and stuff, and he was too out there for what they like to do. So the way that they did this is very key and important to focus in on and talk about. This is an important detail. They told Brown he was crazy. If you look into the Thomas Townsend Brown story and really read it, his daughter, I believe, is still alive and interviewed and wrote a book about his life. Very interesting story, because Thomas Townsend Brown gave this technology up to them. He was going and presenting this technology, trying to get like contracts with the military. They were telling him he was crazy. And meanwhile, NASA, NACA, the precursor to NASA at Ames Research Center in the 40s, was using his technology to break the sound barrier. And so they had done a lot of these experimental X-craft leading up to the X-1 that Chuck Yeager used to fly in to break the sound barrier. And they noticed that the parts that would rip apart when this thing went supersonic were the wingtips and the nose cone, where the highest points of turbulence or air force, compression forces and whatnot. What's called bow shock. So the bow shock of this thing hitting the plane would actually rip the planes apart. So what they did is this is funny because it says the airspeed head for pilot instruments, and that these were airspeed research heads, and what they don't tell you is that these things were electrostatically charged to high voltage. So you get to about like 50,000 volts, and you can start to create air-induced plasmas in the air. And when you start to produce these air plasmas, they're essential for breaking the bow shock on these key parts of the plane when it went supersonic. So the scientists were actually using Brown's technology, or some variation of this effect, to prevent Chuck Yeager's X-1 from ripping apart when it broke the sound barrier. And it was kept classified, and a lot of this research was kept classified until 2008. So the other thing that Eric gets into is this whole back and forth of Andrew Bahnson and Roger Benson, is it Babson? Roger Babson. So it was New Boston in New Hampshire established this thing called the Gravity Research Foundation, which Eric brought up. And this was early on. This guy died in 1967. So the Institute's building closed in 1967 after he died and became a pizza restaurant, but the foundation has continued to offer prizes for essays taking a more conventional scientific approach to the subject of gravity, with winners including respected scientists such as Stephen Hawking and mathematician Roger Penrose. Super interesting. So I want to go get a pizza. I'm going to go write a paper about this so I can get a pizza. Any case, this is really, really cool. They have this monument apparently at Tufts University and a bunch of other places. In fact, I went to Tufts University and I swear that I saw this and I took a picture of it. Oh, look at that. New Boston, New Hampshire, Roger Babson and his associates pioneered an active research for anti-gravity and a partial gravity insulator. That was in 1959. And this is that's out in front of the pizza place, so the monument to pizza. Wow, that's pretty fantastic. So I really enjoy this history, but apparently it's marked in the Rational Wiki under the category of pseudoscience. So what's interesting is that I don't know what else. So Bird's Eye Food and helicopter designer Igor Sikorsky, they held a few conferences, but it was never a large organization, and the focus was on providing grants and essay prizes to people who wanted to, advance the physics and discussion on this, on the condition that they use the money for anti-gravity research, and displayed a stone monument of his design. So you got to have one of these stone monuments and the monument has to promote the institute and carry a text like, it is to remind students of the blessings forthcomings when a semi-insulator is discovered, or in order to harness gravity as a free power and reduce airplane accidents. And it is to remind students of the blessing forthcoming when science determines what gravity is, how it works, and how it may be controlled. Nice. But in any case, Gravity Tavern, where I'd be happy to, this is where I got to meet Eric. If he goes to Boston, we got to go to, we got to have like a gravity conference and invite a whole bunch of physicists from MIT and Harvard and all this stuff, and have another big conference on gravity. That would be great to get some of these top minds together on a discussion like this, because this is an idea that has been lost to pseudoscience, but it might be worth revisiting or discussing. At least, Jeffrey Epstein thought it was worth rediscussing. He invited like Stephen Hawking and a bunch of these guys to a big discussion on gravity and gravity control. But as far as the aliens and UFO evidence and stuff of that nature goes, I've been studying this. So there's a lot of frauds and a lot of weird cases and crap that you get lost in the weeds for. 95% of it is just nonsense out there. But some interesting things that I've discovered. One is this there was UFOs in Denmark that were chased by the Navy out there, Allied Navy forces, and the UFOs dropped an ingot of hot metal. They seen it drop this thing and then fly away, and they actually went and recovered the metal. They brought it back. It went to GEC. It went to a place called GEC Marconi in England, and it stayed in GEC Marconi custody for a number of years until a guy named Howard Cross came and took the metal piece to the U.S., where it went to a metallurgy contracting company called Battelle Memorial Institute. And it's interesting about this stuff. This is if you want to look up the source for that, it's in Jacques Vallee's Forbidden Science, Volume 5. And this just shows where the chain of custody is, that it goes to ODDI, which is what is ODDI? I'm not sure if this is the same exact piece of metal that he went there and took, but I know that these types of metals, these metal ingots, have been recovered from UFO cases in the past, and it looks very similar to this Bob White object, which also looks very similar to a lot of these experiments that some of these channels have been doing on some, using scalar waves. So you take real high energy microwaves and you take them out of phase and you point them at objects, and you can create these scalar waves. And these scalar waves can actually do weird things to metals. And it kind of looks similar to this. There's a channel called Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. This guy, Bob Greenier, is doing the research on this. Interesting stuff. There's also a ton of research that I've done into cold fusion and interviewed a number of cold fusion scientists from MIT, including Mitchell Schwartz and Peter Hagelstein. And they had a conference there in 2014 I went to, in which I met a number of very interesting scientists, including Larry Forsley of SPAWAR, who SPAWAR is the U.S. Navy lab that discovered that tritium cold fusion experiment. This one right here, where they actually discovered cold fusion evidence. They had, tritium production inside of one of these cells, and noticed, this is U.S. Navy laboratories showing metals that have had cold fusion sites in metals. So it caused these explosions, which look very oddly similar to the explosions we see on those pieces of metal. So this curious case of Dr. Howard Cross between this Pinnacle memorandum, which Vallee uncovered in, I think, 68 or 64, late 1960s. This was in the midst of Project Blue Book, when J. Allen Hynek, in his notes, after he died, or at some point, that he worked with Jacques Vallee, and Jacques Vallee found this in the notes on his desk. And this memo was of critical importance because it indicated that there was another secret group operating parallel to Project Blue Book, which had access to metals and materials and other scientific discussions that weren't privy to the rest of the leaders of the official investigation. So, managing official investigations seems to be an expertise of cover-ups in the United States government and all this, and proximity of people like, certain people to these reports is very interesting as well. In any case, yeah, Weinstein did a great job of bringing the attention to this father-son team, and I think he's done a good job too of showing how there might have been a conspiracy within the physics community between this father and son team to send physics on a wild goose chase with the string theory, because here Witten goes and sends. I watched a bunch of interviews with Witten yesterday about all of his contributions to the field, and it seems like he let string theorists create all these different string theories until like there were 6 different string theories, and then he went to California and just showed like how all this was different cases of a much grander theory, and just was like, I don't know, it's like he does all this amazing physics work and research, and it has some real, similar implications of how to generate things that behave very similar to atoms and quantum systems. So it's certainly interesting to study these mathematical structures, even if they are, not empirical representations of reality. But Weinstein seems to have this idea that, it's possible that these guys were so smart that they sent physics for a loop, that they had a lot of this stuff figured out on the space-time metrics and warp, the ruler warpings that he talks about, like that's, and Weinstein talks about this on Joe Rogan. He gets into this a little bit, he says, well, what if you're trying to get somewhere real far away, the best way to do that is to shorten the ruler between so that you don't have to go quite as far. And how do you do that, though? Well, if getting into some of this, the deeper mathematics of this, we've talked about this a lot on the channel, like what Stephen Wolfram is doing a lot of research involved in this with his what is space-time really. He wrote this Stephen Wolfram's blog. If you go to his blog, you can find this writing from December 2015 called What is Space-Time Really? And he seems to lay down this foundation that this connected topology that generates a space-time network or network which are differentiable, geometrically, a Clifford space, a Clifford or a Hilbert space rather, a non-de Sitter space generated through these connected interactions of photons, basically it's a photonically interacting grid of atoms which are generating the fabric of space-time as we measure it with our laboratory instruments and can get and can grasp it and understand it through our perspective on the hypergeometry of the space-time that constructs all these things through these hyper knots and strings that things are on the basic, quantum level of things. So this whole idea is that, if you create enough photonic link, if you get enough powerful enough laser and you focus enough light through space, you might be able to shorten the distance of that space or that space-time. I'm not exactly sure how we use electromagnetic energy or the very basic limited physics tools we have, the neutrons as he says. So Eric Weinstein talks about what the importance of the neutron. What is the neutron? The discovery of the neutron, it was a hammer. So when you want to smash up when you want to smash up an atom, you have a nucleus. You want to get inside the nucleus. Well, you can't get inside there by shooting protons at it because the strong force is just too strong. So if you shoot protons, that positive charge, it sees the positive charge of the nucleus, and it just never quite gets there, and you can't smash atoms and you can't smash up nuclei with protons. In order to smash up nuclei, you need neutrons because they don't have the charge, but they got the mass and they got the bowling ball punch to smash up the nucleus. So what you need is a chamber or a way to generate a lot of really fast neutrons. So you need a material that is a neutron reflector, like beryllium, for example. And when you get two beryllium half shells, graphite, beryllium is examples. Beryllium's a good one, but you get two beryllium half shells like they used in the Slotin experiment. You can get enough of these fast neutrons going to generate a supercriticality where you can actually start smashing up the nuclei, and that releases enough new fast neutrons to cause a nuclear chain reaction. And this is what they were trying to test and measure the criticality of in these early atomic tests with this setup that he was using when he accidentally dropped the thing with the screwdriver and killed himself and another scientist in the process, and also severely radiated the 6 other people in the room with them, and who later died of cancer and effects of the radiation they were exposed to with this core of plutonium inside these two beryllium half shells, which has since been indemnified as the demon core. Dun dun dun. Yeah, so the demon core. Look it up. Neutron reflector. So neutron. So basically, we talk about a neutron. Neutron was an amazing discovery, and that's what led to nuclear fission. It led to all this energy coming out, and neutrons. The discovery of neutrons was just critical. It was a hammer. And so Weinstein is right when he talks about he's afraid that people who are doing the things and that we're doing, with trying to find the hammer. We're trying to find that neutron is basically what we're doing with APEC and what we've been doing with the Alternative Propulsion Engineering Conference, and trying to track down all these scientists out of the woodwork and people who worked on these programs to come forward, is we're trying to find that neutron. We're trying to find that hammer, man, that anti-gravity, that free energy, or whatever have you. And we're looking wherever we can to try to find it. Is there UFOs, or are these things just fake? There's a lot of debate over that. There's a lot of technologies that exist, especially these, the stuff that came out of that Lake Marabou and Star Wars Defense Initiative, where they decided that, this ground to space, laser-based propulsion, the aperture in the laser widens up too much as it gets too far away. This is one of the biggest problems with the laser tech, is that the beam diverges. So the further away you get, the harder it is to hit your target, and also the less power you get per square inch because of the beam divergence. So realistically, the best way to do these things is to step it up a notch. Is what they did is they put the lasers on board the actual crafts themselves, and then they focus the laser ahead of it. In the missile, they use this on missiles too. It's in torpedoes and other things. They blast this laser-induced plasma ahead of the craft, just similar to what I were talking about with the X-1 and this Biefeld-Brown effect that was used on the B-2 Spirit bomber, and wasn't publicly declassified, and I think until 2008 under Obama, this stuff finally came out. But yeah, this type of technology could explain some of these things, but it certainly can't explain warp drive capabilities or some of these other physical phenomenon that are being reported by some of these pilots. I know we have some pretty advanced stuff out there. I don't know if we have something as advanced. I don't know. What the thing is, I've interviewed experts on this. So who have I interviewed? I've interviewed guys like T.D. Barnes. T.D. Barnes was head of project manager of special programs out at Area 51. EG&G special projects manager. I mean, this guy's documented. He's got all the CIA planes that he worked on for Area 50 at Area 51 for EG&G, and so go check out that interview. Link is in the description and stuff down below. I've also interviewed Ed Fouché, very long and very length. I was good friends with him for many years, a former Area 51 employee. Introduced me to a couple other interesting people who I talked to briefly. Won't get into some of that, but also I've talked to Fred Dunham before too. So I've interviewed a number of people who've been out there, verified Area 51 people, and gotten some real interesting information about what goes on out there. So the 1960s was an important era, and trying to break this all down of where everything fits in and happened. So 1958, the CIA starts Project Rainbow out at Area 51, and this was 1956 is when they really set up Area 51, and then 2 years later they were working on Project Rainbow, which was this invisibility technology. Now it's interesting. I was watching a thing on Disney Channel of all places on U480. Was it U480? Yeah, there's a German submarine called U480 that was that was shooting down a whole bunch of ships in the English Channel during World War II, and they couldn't detect this thing and find it, and they eventually got it with depth charges. And didn't know till years later when they went down and actually found they found the wreck of the sub with scuba gear and GPR scanning to scan the bottom. It's all in this Disney Channel episode on it's probably on here if you go look at the Wikipedia article. No, it's not. But it was in the Secrets of the Deep, or Draining the Seas, is Draining the Oceans is something what it was called, I think, if you want to look it up on Disney Plus. But anyways, I heard about this, and it was talking about this stealth submarine that the Germans developed, and I was like, stealth? Like, what kind of stealth technology did it have? And apparently it had these anechoic tiles, and they're actually used on all submarines now. And these were the ones that was on. It was basically a bunch of these perforations or holes with rubber coating material, which made it both sound deadening and also radar deadening. And the holes were drilled with the distances between them corresponding to the wavelengths of the frequencies of the enemy radar that they were trying to evade. So very interesting science behind it all. Yeah, I agree. Disney sucks, but dude, at least I'll give Disney some credit. Like, they have some pretty interesting UFO flicks. Check out The Cat from Outer Space sometime. That one's super interesting. Okay, I gotta bring in yes. Hey, Michael.
You brought me up just at the right time. So these submarines, are you familiar with MIT just released a new toroidal propeller? Check that out.
Okay.
Or was it yes, or a Mobius strip propeller? Yeah, anyway, let me check.
Let me find this. So toroidal. Oh yeah, these ones.
Yeah. So this is actually really interesting because for many decades, this has been like a big military secret to how you minimize the noise on these propellers, and on these geometries were like top secret, and now MIT's like independently discovered this again, or rediscovered it. But they've been using this for years to keep like subs quiet, like really, really quiet, because these just they have like almost, like, compared to normal propellers, they have almost no what do you call it, like vortices that they shed. So but yeah, I mean, this is the real stuff, you know, like these are the types of things that they have. And this is a good example of a practical application of topology to finding better solutions for these things. And that this is this kind of like one of the reasons why topology is so big now. Not only does it have
Quiet as hell.
gravity. What's this?
The drones, they're probably quiet. They're probably super quiet.
Oh yeah, and you can like double the flight time because they're more efficient, even though they're heavier. Yeah, these are awesome.
The wind industry, they're gonna have to.
This is gonna make these plus slightly better batteries are going to make VTOL like personal aircrafts a thing for sure. Like once you get these on the Jetson 1 or whatever they call that VTOL like personal vehicle thing, like there's this quadcopter, you strap into it and you fly it. And it's like you can only fly it for like 20-30 minutes, but with these you could fly it for 40 minutes.
Dude, that is far out.
Yeah, that's the real stuff. And this was all discovered around the time they were looking at all these other stealth technologies as well, maybe slightly after. And then yeah, this is cool stuff. Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure they have even more efficient geometries that they haven't disclosed. But this was just like recently rediscovered by a lab at MIT, and they had no connection to any of the deep state stuff. So they were like, "Well, I guess we'll just publish it."
They got the guy from Big Bang Theory on there to.
I don't know. That looks like it's photoshopped.
Yeah. PC.
But yeah, those are big right now. And they like once it was like out on MIT, then it was just everywhere. Real disclosure in the background, you know.
Yeah, so there's some real disclosure. I'm not sure if this qualifies or how this would relate to anti-gravity. But
it wouldn't. But this is
that was pretty cool listening to Witten talk about, you know, Glenn Martin Company basically sitting them down and saying that, you know, we're going to make you do anti-gravity for us. And
I would be very curious, Jeremy, if you could dig into the files with that friend of yours who has all those UFO files and things and random. I don't know, maybe not even him, but like I wonder, like now that you know about propellers, what could you find?
Oh yeah, going back to the classified, you know, patents and literature.
Yeah, I bet you could find a thing here or there.
Ooh, yeah,
that'd be interesting.
It'd be interesting because
like, I wonder where it was first developed. Anyway, whatever.
What's interesting? No, it's not whatever, because you'll find that a scientist worked on this propeller system, you know, also worked on a bunch of other classified stuff. You know,
that's a good point. Yeah, whoever.
Bibliography.
This was rediscovered. This was rediscovered. I should be clear.
Yes, rediscovered. Absolutely, it was.
Oh wait, did I talk about this on your channel before? Deja vu. I don't know.
No, we did not, man. This is new. Yeah,
weird.
definitely need to check that out. Sikorsky knew about this and when, you know, who knows? But this is one of those things that was, oh man, the U.S. subs might probably use this on their.
Yeah.
How far back does that go?
There's that big metal one that they're showing off. Where's that from?
I just thought that was amazing that the UB40, 480, I mean U480. A number of these German subs got these coatings, but they were really the problem was the glue, the glues that had to be developed to stick these on, so like rubber on metal, that could also put up to seawater and turbulence. So the adhesives were a big problem with apparently with the application and keeping these things together, and that's how this thing was. It was eventually killed by a minefield. It said they set up a mine trap for it, and they eventually got it. But
anyway.
But yeah, I thought it was interesting that they have this, here's the metal of the pressure hull, and then they have this adhesive, and then the Opinol coating with this perforated, designated perforations in the material.
Yeah, like if you you can actually demonstrate the effect sort of if you just like make a hot cocoa, and if you pour the water into the cocoa. The surfactants allow the bubble size to be very, very small. So if you tap the bottom of the mug, at first the sound will be very low frequency, and then if you keep tapping the bottom of the mug, the frequency will increase and increase until all of the bubbles have reached the surface of the liquid. And that's because when the bubbles are dispersed throughout that liquid, the differential equation has a large loss coefficient because the bubbles are compressible. So more of the sound is being converted into heat. And that loss coefficient brings the resonant frequency of that material down. And it's the same thing here. You have all these little microstructures here, and they all change the properties of the material when exposed to sound.
Yeah, it's this.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, standard damping factor. This is all in electromagnetics, but the same thing applies for sound. Anyway, just wanted to jump on real quick. Lots of cool stuff going on in the background. In terms of research, we've just built our first room temperature thermionic devices. And we'll be testing those to validate whether or not they actually work. And, the claims of the original paper are a little bit out there. But yeah, if they work, we'll know soon. And similar for Dan Sheehan's device, or the claims he made on APEC about, actually, I don't know if he mentioned that particular device on APEC, so I won't mention it here. But yeah, so Dan Sheehan says he's got some promising results, and we are following up those with the replication of that. And I just got in touch with a very distinguished professor who's in graphene production. So we can maybe even test the graphene energy harvester that the University of Arkansas people were looking at. And in fact, through another colleague, I found more research preceding the University of Arkansas research, which suggests that these graphene flakes have negentropic properties. But anyway, that's
yeah. There's a lot of other research that I don't know. Did you watch the Eric Weinstein interview and some of the stuff he went through?
Yeah. I mean, I think he's pretty much spot on with a lot of that stuff for the most part. Like, I mean,
yeah, he doesn't get lost in the weeds. I mean, there's a lot of other stuff that research that these guys did. With like DeWitt, for example, wrote the 66 paper on superconductors and gravitational drag, and that like is a key piece of my, along with the stuff that you pointed out on ammonia mercury solutions and bipolarionic superconductors. Very interesting stuff early on research that I think was done actually. GE, General Electric, which is not to be confused with General Electric Company, There's two of them apparently. So General Electric Company is the one in the UK, which it got bought out by Marconi Electric Systems and eventually became British Aerospace, BAE, modern day, right? So GEC, Marconi would have been the ones who have did a lot of classified, early radio stuff, and would have had a lot of. This was an old company that did a lot of defense project, contracts and stuff for the. They used to build these switchboards for complex control panels and stuff like that for some of the early stuff that they got into. So really interesting company with some history and also the big thing I thought was that really General Electric. It's not to be confused with General Electric, which we're going to talk about, we'll get back to and talk about in a second. But I found this whole thing about these GEC Marconi death scientists deaths. And a number of these people were actually killed. Like I think 20 of these scientists who worked at the United States Strategic Defense Initiative related projects on the Stingray torpedo project wound up just committing suicide or just dying in car accidents or, just weird deaths. And there's this, 20 dead scientists in this Cold War secret project conspiracy.
I mean, you'll see a lot of that after the 1970s, Kennedy was one of the firsts, and then they cleared house, and now essentially the Project Paperclip now is the ones in charge, basically. A lot
of the Nazis were getting rounded up in the 70s too, and a lot of those guys were paperclip scientists. They were trying to go after some of them.
Interesting. I don't know.
You never heard the story? There's a whole documentary I watched, Treblinka Guard, and this guy got it was basically from the Ukraine, and the Russians came out with this whole thing and forged this documentation saying that he was this Treblinka Guard. This guy was him, and he had forged paperwork, and they had found him, and they created this whole thing, brought him to trial in Israel, convicted him, and assassinated him, and then post mortem they have granted his appeal and decided that he wasn't even the right guy.
Well, I guess I'll just defer to your expertise regarding the history of it all. I just know the science.
I know it was a cool story and a cool documentary about it that had gone in this little town in. But anyways, unrelated to this, let's get back to this. I was talking about. I sent you a link in the back. What's this thing? Whatever, the StreamYard. Yeah. This guy, Henry William Wallace.
Wait, before you move on to that, the Paul McEwen at University of Cornell here. He's got some very interesting research about graphene.
Okay.
Yeah, I sent the link in the thing in the StreamYard.
This is it right here, right?
Terahertz time domain measurement on stuff. Electromechanical oscillators with graphene and nanotubes and things. Strain solitons and topological defects in graphene.
Oh yes, his most recent works here. Nanotubes, 2008.
Yeah. Anyways, I can't. I don't see it right this second, but so some of these are relevant to the research at University of Arkansas. So that's exciting. And I found this guy. I didn't even find this guy through the citations on the other document. He might be there. I don't know. But just another guy I know who's even more brilliant than me, I would say. Like when I mentioned the University of Arkansas research, he was like, oh, yeah, what about Paul McEwen? He was working on stuff like that, like 10 years before them. But it's interesting.
Yeah, active matter assembly and measurement in chemical and biological nanostructures.
Yeah.
Yeah, this guy's the real deal. Very interesting. Yeah,
and something to look into later. But yeah, so that's
find more of the scientists present day, because he always asks, Eric asks, like, where are the physicists and where are the scientists working on this stuff? And it's very compartmentalized and stovepiped, as he points out and stuff. And it's interesting where they choose to do a lot of this research. So, for example, they needed access to a lot of mercury and a place, what better than a light bulb company in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, that made, mercury vapor bulbs. And
well, I gotta just say though, like I think Eric is wrong on this point, and specifically, no, I'm getting an echo here. I'll turn off my sound but anyway, so specifically, he was talking about. Well, he thought that if there is anti-gravity going on, it must be like the top physicists. It must necessarily be the top physicists. And I think the issue with that is there's two types of ways we could be off in terms of what quantum gravity is. So yes, we could be off in terms of the real situation with quantum gravity is more complicated than we've currently envisioned, in which case it's difficult to find the reality because it's just like hiking up Mount Everest. It's just fundamentally difficult. But the alternative is something that's not something sociological has gone wrong. So you have all these scientists studying various topics, or sorry, you have all these scientists and they get stuck in, string theory must be correct. The holographic principle must be correct. And then they all go to that because that's what gets the funding. And if the scientific system is trapped within that, then maybe there's something that's not as flashy, that didn't get the funding, that nonetheless is the correct approach. And if that's true, then quantum gravity isn't necessarily hard in terms of it just fundamentally takes a lot of man hours. It may be hard sociologically because the correct stuff never got funded or never publicly got funded. And if that's true, then it's perfectly reasonable to imagine that some private corporation or other entity funded that research decades ago, has the technology, and just doesn't care to share it with the rest of us for whatever reason. And
I think you make an excellent point.
There's still, there's definitely some issues with that argument, perhaps, but in terms of who's working on gravity stuff now, or who's supposedly in these projects, they're not top physicists. Sure, he says that's a mistake on the part of the establishment, that we should have our top people on this. Well, maybe we don't need our top people on this because it's not so. For example, you don't need differential geometry to figure out. Actually, not even that. You don't need to understand chemistry and quantum mechanics to start a fire. We've had that. Fire's like one of the first things people invented. This is the same issue. So, like, what if gravity is such a way that, like, you can understand the basics of the phenomenon when you see it, and then you know how to work with it in a practical engineering sense. Like, we've known how to make bronze and iron for centuries before we understood the chemistry of metallurgy. It's the same thing here. If there's someone out there who understands gravity, maybe they don't necessarily understand it in terms of differential geometry. Maybe you don't need to understand it in terms of differential geometry. You just need to understand, in this given material, what is the thing that is interacting with the gravitational field that you can poke until it works. And then, like, you just try to optimize for that thing. Once you you would only need to observe that effect. You'd only have to notice it once, and then you'd be like, how do we optimize for this? And then you don't need to know the differential geometry. Even when we were starting with airplanes and stuff, okay, fluid dynamics is really complicated. You have the Navier-Stokes equation, but like the very first airplanes that actually worked, you just had a curved piece of fabric. You didn't have an optimized airfoil or anything. You just had the very basic, here we noticed that this goes up when this happens, and then people optimized for it. And someone the first airplane was the Wright brothers. They just had a bicycle shop, and that's all they needed. So I think that assuming that it must be the top researchers, or it's not real, is a very bad assumption to make.
Well,
But anyway, that's just my opinion.
There's also
I don't know why he thinks that it must be that way. Maybe it's because he's hopeful that his particular theory of quantum gravity is correct. But even if his particular theory is correct, if you just were some random person banging rocks together and you noticed an effect and you can optimize for it, what does it matter? If you understand the differential geometry, if you can understand the effect well enough to just get something floating, and maybe that's why early reports of these things, you had the saucer wobbling back and forth and processing and all these things, because it wasn't understood well enough to cancel out all of those effects. It was just understood well enough to get an effect in the first place. So yeah, I think if someone was lucky enough to notice something decades ago, they could have done something with it. Without necessarily, so yeah, it's the same thing. You don't need to understand chemistry to make bronze. You don't need to understand thermodynamics to make fire. And those things have been around for millennia. You don't need to understand genetics to do farming. We didn't need Watson and Crick when we invented we bred the first wheat or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's my rant. I'm done for the night. I think I need to get back to an NSF proposal I'm writing.
Well, thank you for joining us. I just want to I'm going to add a bunch of stuff to this all, because very often isn't the scientists from our top universities, but sometimes it is. Here we have an example of a Caltech physicist with Bernard Hayes, who was picked up by Lockheed Martin, theoretical division in 1979, and worked there until he retired in 1999. So, but you also have guys from Rensselaer Polytech, some, not a big name school, heading the Star Wars SDI programs research into laser propulsion and stuff like that, after he took over for the Project Outgrowth guys. And interesting, a lot of these guys, you go into their literature, you find out who are they writing papers with, who is their advisors, and what kind of work did they do. And that's how you really do real physics science research, to get to the bottom of who's doing what. Is Lockheed Martin hiring scientists, physicists, senior? What is it? This is a senior staff physicist. That's what he was, a senior staff scientist at Lockheed Martin, Palo Alto, 1979 to 1999. It's on his resume right here. So you can see what a real Bob Lazar looks like. When you see a guy like Bob Lazar, who claims he was the senior staff physicist at 20 years old. He was only a staff scientist. Once he gets older, he becomes senior. You don't get to be a senior in your 20s, dude. It's just, even if you are the smartest, bestest, physicist in the world, which I don't think you are. I don't think Bob Lazar is. I think there's a lot of other guys that I would really rather prefer to interview if I could, really have a choice. If it was, Hayes or Bob Lazar, I think I'd pick Hayes, because the guy actually has the credentials like proven. It's not like a, well, what if maybe he did, you know? Maybe he did get hired by EG&G in Area 51, even though he knew the one guy who was blowing the whistle on all of it to George Knapp, you know, years before. If you look up, enough of you. We're done with you. Unless you want to come on. Hey, I sent her, I think I sent her a link to the StreamYard in case she wanted to join. She's brave enough, but doesn't look like it. Look up John Lear on the record for that. I thought that was super interesting and wanted to point that out to anyone want to look at 1987 and look into those years if you really want to do the background history on a lot of this stuff. And then also look into UFO TV Live 1988. This gives you the 2 years that led up to the whole Bob Lazar story that we have, and it will really put the whole thing in perspective. And I don't know where the real video is. It's hard to find this one sometimes. UFO TV. The aviary is the important thing, because there was a shadowy group called the Aviary, which Richard Doty was Falcon in the Aviary, and I think Hal Puthoff was Owl, John Alexander was like Albatross, and all these people. Anyways, yeah, this kind of stuff is important for understanding a lot of that story, I believe. But more important is the real history of what was really going on at Area 51 during the 1970s, 1980s. And it was a lot of this stealth technology, invisibility technology, and what's called ECCMs. So when you have radar, radar is called an electronic countermeasure. So it's an electronic device that you're using to detect planes and give yourself heads up and an advantage over the enemy. And so an electronic countermeasure is also known as an electronic protective measure, is a practice of jamming. And your EPM is your resistance to jamming. So there's a whole thing going on with jamming and spoofing, and understanding the frequencies that the enemy radar operate at, and then they got to have two different radars that operate at different frequencies to throw people off, and then other detectors that are more sensitive and classified that they can't talk about, like quantum radar and Doppler and other kinds of things. But these ECCM techniques, there's a bunch of different ones. And this was the focus of a lot of the Project Rainbow's classified, research that started out at Area 51, 58 throughout the 60s. Throughout a lot of Project Blue Book, as they were really working on, ways to make their U-2 spy planes invisible as they flew them over Russia, so that it wouldn't have another Francis Gary Powers incident. But yeah, this SRI International company is another interesting thing that comes up, because this separated from Stanford University in 1970 and became SRI International in 77. And they did a lot of really interesting, rogue, weird research, including, later stuff on, ARPANET, and then the whole DARPA stuff, laser photocoagulation. Very interesting company. But yeah, this is where I think they hired a bunch of scientists to look into this as well during the 1970s. So the 60s, I think they skipped a decade. I don't really have a definitive thing of, there was a study group that was put together in the 60s specifically on anti-gravity or gravity. You had Bahnson Labs research with, bringing back Brown, a decade and a half after he'd already given all the secrets to the U.S. and Air Force and NACA or whatever to develop the X1 and break the sound barrier. And but he finally got to do some of that research here at Bahnson Labs, and of course William Power Lear, John Lear's father, visited the lab and can be seen right here in one of his early visits to the lab. I thought that was interesting because John that puts John Lear's dad in the middle of a lot of this top secret anti-gravity research that was going on all the way back in the 50s. And that doesn't mean he was involved in all these spin-off stovepiped programs that we come into since the 1950s, when they were publishing in magazines that we were going to have anti-gravity soon. There was a hoaxer of the 1950s named Otis Carr, who built this thing that looked a lot like the Billy Meyer flying saucer, which looked a lot like the Bob Lazar flying sports model saucer as well. But it goes back to this anti-gravity techno scammer, Otis Carr, who was getting funding for anti-gravity research, even though he didn't really have real physics or science, sound science behind it all. And this sort of reemerged in the 1960s with Eric Lathwaite and this whole maglev stuff, and towards the 70s reinvigorated this idea in gyroscopic propulsion and anti-gravity. And there were a number of people that were claiming this stuff, and Boeing got interested, hired guys like Mike Gamble to go and build large-scale gyroscopes and run experiments for gimbals and gyroscopes on large scale. And then there's this theory of gravito-electromagnetism, which I just started talking about before Michael left. I talked about how DeWitt was the theoretical physicist doing a lot of the research in this. He wrote this paper in 1966 on superconductors and gravitational drag. And we find that right in the 1970s, after they take this guy named Henry William Wallace, who was this scientist at GE Aerospace in Valley Forge, PE. And they had him start working on this spin-aligned nuclei with this spin-aligned nuclei project. And now this project actually dates back a little further than this to, 1959. In the Advances in Astronautical Sciences Journal, Volume 5, there's an article by Frederick E. Alzafon on the origin of the gravitational field, and he talks about this whole theory on spin alignment and gravity control through alignment of spins. And there's, 61 also, 2 years later, John Watson writes a paper that gets classified on gravitational control research at a university. And then not until 1981 does Boeing open up a anti-gravity study on this Alzafon effect as well. But it's interesting that Alzafon writes this first, and then you have GE Aerospace working on this in the 1970s with this guy Henry William Wallace, working along with GE's light bulb manufacturing company, because they have this whole access to this mercury for making mercury vapor bulbs, so they can use the General Electric light bulb company as a cover for their research on building these mercury plasmas where they're rotating them to get these spin alignments to do some of these experiments. And then years later it comes out where we find these rumors that the Nazis were doing this inside the tunnels in eastern Poland towards the end of the war under Walter Dornberger with a Project RIESE, R-I-E-S-E. If you look that up, it's really interesting nerd stuff, dude. And dude, Bob Lazar is a joke compared to the scientists that you'll be introduced to if you keep just following this channel and watching this. and getting into the real science of this stuff. I mean, this is not the strongest one that I'm getting into either. It just shows that GE Aerospace got the contract to do some of this research that was related to a spinoff of something that came out of these think tanks with all these of our top physicists in 1957. So, don't think that it just ended there, because a lot of these ideas stovepiped out and went into these, gravity shielding experiments, of course. But this is all pseudoscience now, and it's been debunked and sort of disproven as we've learned more about, asymptotic freedom and, degrees of freedom in solids, and how those dynamics create materials and whatnot. But essentially, if you want to, spin align all the nuclei, this is a great way to do it with this rotating mercury plasma that you can dope with other elements to create these states where you can produce these. If you supercool by mercury ammonia solution, it goes superconductive because it creates what are called these bipolaronic superconductors, which is I wish Michael would have got into that a little bit more before he left, because I was hoping he would fill us in on that. But that's okay. That's his expertise than mine. But it just goes to show you on the history of this that you have GE Aerospace doing some interesting research. This guy writing a bunch of patents, and then it disappears and all goes dark, and you don't know kind of where it went from there. That was sort of the research phase. And then you have rumors about a development phase from, my buddy, good old Edgar Fouché. And Edgar Fouché, former Area 51 employee, talked about this TR3 program. So there was a TR3A Black Manta, TR3A Black Manta, which interestingly was this drone technology. And we covered this in another video a couple months ago. But this TR3BA or Black Manta, right? So there was apparently a TR3B Astra, or the TR3A Black Manta, which is confusing because the Black Manta starts with a B and the Astra starts with an A. So it kind of like is this dual confusion type of thing. But he swears that Teledyne Ryan, he didn't name Teledyne Ryan as the manufacturer, but it eventually led me to that down that field when we began looking, because he said TR doesn't stand for tactical reconnaissance like normal aircraft lingo. TR stands for something else. So, well, the TR3 and TR3A Black Manta isn't a tactical reconnaissance vehicle either. It's actually TR stands for Teledyne Ryan. So that led me down the path of, well, did Teledyne Ryan develop, or was Teledyne Ryan, the development company after the research that was done at GE into this technology, and did they develop actual craft? As Edgar Fouché was claiming that they did. He claimed they had operational TR3Bs in the late 70s, early 80s when he was working out at Area 51. I mean, this is kind of crazy, UFO stuff if you really want to get into it. I didn't see a lot of evidence for that. I have awaited the day that they roll one of these things out and says, hey, we've been keeping this secret. But apparently the reactor core that fuels this thing is nuclear powered, and that violates treaties on nuclear powered airplanes, which is apparently why it's still classified. And I was interesting that Eric talked a little bit about I forget what that was in reference to. I'm going to go watch the whole podcast again on Spotify and from 44 minutes on and really dig down on some of the physics that he was getting into and the science of this stuff, because this is really important to me. I've done a lot of time researching this, thanklessly. A lot of people have ripped off, stolen, and used my research, and that's fine. A lot of people give me attribution and credit, and then people work their way back here to get to me as a source, and also become sources, because a lot of people come and they say, hey, you got this wrong, or I know more about this than you do, and here, let me share some information with you. And I welcome that. I love that when people can come and, you know, share information with me that I didn't know about this. Like, oh, you didn't really research this, and you should, or you made this mistake. Oh, I love that. You know, what I don't like is, you know, people who cherry pick like little bits of pieces and say, well, oh God, you know, these UFO scammers are conning the whole intellectual dark web. And let me just help them realize that they've been conned by, you know, offering my input on this. You know, no, well, he says, you know, in the back of his mind, and one of the big things, are we faking a UFO? Rogan. Weinstein. Okay, this is we may be faking a UFO situation. So this is a whole, you've probably seen this clip. This has been around, and he says, are we faking a UFO situation? So go watch this clip where he even calls out, you know, am I being conned? So it's just ridiculous that for, you know, just watch it before you know. I as much as I hate Jeremy Corbell and I cringe, I actually have to sit there. It pains me to sit there and watch and listen to everything he has to say and go through it, but I have to do it. It's like a torture I must endure, because every once in a while you catch Jeremy, like he on Russell Brand the other day. Jeremy Corbell talked about, I think it was right here. I don't know if it was this one, but around like, maybe it was the longer one, around 19 minutes, or maybe it was a shorter one, around 15 minutes. I'm not sure. But anyways, at one point, Jeremy talks about this metamaterial, anti-gravity metamaterial that these UFOs use, and how it's a layered nanomaterial that needs to be made in the zero gravity environment of space. But he's never called on that until, like, say, well, what's your source on that? Or what's, you know, where'd you get that information from? And I thought that was, you know, interesting, because now he's moved off the idea that UFOs fly using element 115 for their anti-gravity, and he's now embracing the more realistic physics model that, you know, they're using metamaterials somehow to, you know, warp the fabric of space-time, and that the metamaterials need to be made in the zero gravity environment of space is his claim. Now, that's interesting, because I believe that I was the source of that claim, because I made that claim in a video from 2008 that I did on photonic circuits and stuff, where I had this whole idea about using lasers and these tractor beam technologies that MIT came out with in 2008, to use tractor beam lasers and heating and resonance technologies to build things, 3D printing atom by atom. That would be the future, and that you could create these nanomaterials on a real precise scale. And they may or may not need, you know, zero gravity environment to actually do that. It would be helpful, because you eliminate that whole issue of microgravity and the fluctuations that it introduces to your the puzzle you're trying to put together on the atomic level. So yeah, Corbell is, I really wish that, you know, we weren't so shadow banned and so put, you know, people are out here saying, oh, name one person. I'm going on this video and seeing people, and they're like, oh, name one sort of, you know, some of the videos out here, like, name one person out there that's done more to reveal more information and interviewed more people about Area 51 than Corbell has. I'm like, dude, me, hello, you're looking at him. Like, do you follow my channel? Like, I've been doing this for like twice as long as this guy, and I've interviewed like way more credible people and like brought real information out. And there's a reason that this guy is getting all over the mainstream, the big platforms and stuff, and not me, man. It has to do with the information ban and the shadow ban on a lot of this information. A lot of the stuff that you learn about tonight, and a lot of stuff we covered tonight. It's boring, but this is classified intel. Like, this is stuff that was classified, the real UFO research stuff that was done on this. And this continued with NASA in the 1990s with Ning Li. But people talk about Ning Li and NASA and the Boeing research on anti-gravity from the 90s, but they don't understand it goes back to the 60s and 70s with GE and some of these other companies, and that Marconi might have been doing their own version of this research across the pond too. And it all relates to a lot of these ideas of gravity, and that were completely ignored by the mainstream, but taken seriously on an underground level in very quiet circles and not widely talked about. But again, this is the metamaterial that he's talking about, with this alternating layers of 1 to 4 microns of dark bismuth and 100 to 200 microns of the silver magnesium zinc alloy. So I thought that was interesting, right? Silver magnesium zinc alloy. So that's the silver, means the silver color, not so the dark lines are the bismuth, and the lighter lines are the magnesium zinc alloy. So you don't need a zero gravity and microenvironment to create this. These microns are very thick layers compared to the atomic scale, and you can make these in a vacuum chamber vapor deposition machine like we have down at our lab in New Jersey. So we're actually working on making a layered nanomaterial of these dimensions, although I don't know if we have the magnesium zinc alloy. We're just using pure magnesium for that layer. We may have to look into the constituencies of that zinc magnesium alloy, make sure we get that right in our vapor depth experiments. But yeah, we could build this and test it out. And we were just talking about this. I should put in the thing on those toroidal motors. But yeah, the cold fusion stuff is super interesting. Check out the 2004 colloquium, 2014 SCF-LANR IAP course on cold fusion. I posted the whole course. It's a good primer for any serious student who has a technical background going into it. There will be a lot of calculus, Hamiltonians. Make sure you're familiar with some basic, quantum theory and physics before you go into it. But yeah, that'll give you a good primer on the theory of cold fusion and the research that's been done up until 2014. And I have to do an update next year because that will have been 10 years, man. And I have to interview some of these people to see where the field's at now. And again, the terahertz gap, an interesting, people don't know that there's this missing gap in the electromagnetic spectrum that corresponds to this structure of the atom itself. And there's this whole theory that gravity might be functioning in and around this terahertz gap, and that the way to eliminate gravity is by operating on photonic frequencies which bypass electromagnetic interaction within within and around this gap, and that will thereby eliminate gravity. That was one theory, and it's based on. There's a lot of other serious, sober scientists working on this today. If you want to look into it, it's called this maritime Casimir effect, and let me find that whole thing. So this whole idea of polarizing the vacuum, you can produce matter, antimatter, different types of plates. So this Casimir effect and this idea of these moving mirrors and these vacuum fluctuations and these optical cavities with these moving mirrors. So these can be this mechanism is just a visual guide that people can understand, but it might be something a little bit different than the actual actuator or mechanism. It's not going to be, a bunch of little tiny nano springs on a board, pushing these plates back and forth. It's going to be, electrically actuated or material that, muscle, like those muscle materials or something else that's going to be electrically actuated. There's a guy, a physicist working on this right now called Dr. Mike McCulloch. His work's pretty interesting. I've interviewed him on APEC. Let him present, and he talks about this whole this Casimir effect and this maritime Casimir effect and how it can be used. It's interesting. There used to be a bunch of shows on gravity. You could find these educational things, and they would show this maritime Casimir effect where they'd make a wave pool and they'd put two like little floating boats in it, and they show like how over time the boats will be attracted to each other through the dampening of the waves that are between the two ships, and that it's a natural kind of form of gravity if we think of matter just existing in this UNRRA radiation bath of space-time. What's called the UNRU or UNRU radiation, this background space-time, if we're able to sort of make use of that fluidness of space-time that we're floating around in, and all those gradual fluctuations which collectively add up to produce the effect that we see as gravity, which is essentially a power dissipation effect if you model it according to the models that Todd Desiato and others have come up with. So we've come up with a lot of the physics for how to produce this, and we're just trying to get the material science right and produce it in a lab. And that's the hard part, and that's the part that takes a lot of money, funding, equipment, and a lot of time to sit there and try this. Let's try that. Let's try this. Try that. Let's layer graphene on top of bismuth, and let's try to create, let's do it with barium titanate and another ferroelectric material, or let's try to create a Bragg mirror with a quantum well and then pump it so that we can produce polariton condensates and cavity exciton polaritons, so that we can test negative mass, and that maybe if we take these squeezed condensed the squeezed vacuum states, we can produce negative mass just regularly with lasers and surface plasma on polaritons with the right types of materials that can house these polariton condensates. So you get this liquid light material, this surface which just basically two mirrors that can trap light inside indefinitely and keep the light stuck inside. Well, anyone who watched Andrew Strominger's, so he was on Strominger, was on, this one, Strominger. He was on Lex Friedman 2 weeks ago, right? Go watch this and listen. I'm just going to play the very opening part of this, because he says something like super profound about black holes, man. I mean, the first just 3 minutes on black holes right here is super profound, because he basically says what a black hole is anything that like where the light goes in and doesn't come out. So what if, you're creating this, you have what's called like strange metal or something on the surface of your craft. Now, strange metals are interesting. Leonard Susskind talks about strange metals in this quantum physics mystery of them. In a recent interview, I showed this and talked about this, but these new types of strange metals, they're topologically equivalent to extremal black holes, and this was proven through a number of topologists and other mathematicians who've modeled the charge transport in strange metals. So again, extremal black holes. This is like we're dealing with black hole science, and this is key to how UFOs work because they're invisible and they can travel in and out of our physical like reality, basically. And how do you do that? Well, it's quantum mechanics, and it's done via black holes and done via quantum physics and these types of exotic materials. And I believe that, if we've recovered pieces of UFOs, we have access to this technology, and it could go back and we could have had insights into this stuff that we're just beginning to unlock now. And I just wonder about, how exciting of a field this is to where we are right now, and how amazing, the research that I've done just brought me down these paths. And I just I just get so sick in my stomach and frustrated when I see people who aren't interested in the academics, aren't interested in the real science or the real deep intellectual stuff. They're like, I don't have the head for this. I can't watch this. And they'll go and watch the Skepchick, over there, Rebecca Watson, just trash talk this whole subject for 19 minutes and then hit and run and move on and not really ever look into the science of anti-gravity, the whole history of, classified programs that have gone out on Area 51, the real research that's been done there, what they're actually doing out there and working on, and some of the, companies that are involved in these stovepipe black project operations, the actual structure of them, who gets hired. People don't know these things. We got, guys commenting on this stuff who just aren't aware of the history of how these things are put together. The guys say, oh, they don't hire 20-year-olds for classified programs. Like on the most classified program in the country, they wouldn't hire a 20-year-old. Are you kidding me? Yeah, I know 20-year-olds today are really stupid, but back in 1940s, man, it was a different era. And, just not all 20-year-olds are the same either, man. There's different people in this world. Not everyone's the same. You've had, just because you've had a lot of experiences with a lot of dumb people, it doesn't mean that there's other people who have a lot of experiences with a lot of really smart people whose job isn't to like identify the 10 or 20 or however many so these people graduate from our colleges and universities every year, and how to scoop them up and induct them into intelligence work, or at least follow their genius for possible developments. Because like when you found a Nikola Tesla, he's going to get you. Or when you found a Rydberg or who discovered the neutron. And when you find one of those guys who's going to make a discovery, and really that's really going to break something apart and break physics up. Physics is everything. All our technology and advancements is based around physics. So yeah, I think that it's a shame. He also talks about the Mansfield Amendment, which was so key. 1973 was a key year in this all because you had so much going on in the early 70s, and then 1973 really just killed a lot of stuff, and it apparently a lot of stuff went dark until for years later. But yeah, it's just the Mansfield Amendment, the whole history of this father-son team, the husband and wife team, and then possible derailment of the entire field of theoretical physics to, throw us off this idea that, space-time could be and relativity itself could be a construct of quantum gravity, and an artifact or consequence of, that construct, rather than, an actual physical law or fundamental rule itself. That this whole idea of energy can bend space, tells energy how to move, or matter how to move, and matter tells, space how to bend, type deal of general relativity. Well, maybe we can understand what's going on a little bit more deeply and figure out how to make space-time bend in that stress energy tensor and that type of stuff. And, you know, some of that's a little bit beyond my pay grade at this moment, man. I would love to go back to grad school and really get my PhD in this stuff, but I kind of like to keep it at this level where I can still relate to a somewhat regular audience and where I can interview and talk to guys like Jack Sarfati who do all this advanced theoretical physics work, and I try to break it down and understand it in terms that, you know, we can actually get into a laboratory and build this stuff, man. "19 PhD graduates in 15 years. That's crazy. Yeah, that's not a lot, man. I mean, yeah, that'd be great. I would do my PhD under Brian if I wanted to get into astrophysics. But I think I'd want to do condensed matter. I really like the solid state and condensed matter stuff a lot better. I don't know. Just my but anyways, yeah, thanks for watching. I'm glad you guys liked it. And again, I'm unfortunately Rebecca Watson and Eric Weinstein did not have time to join us tonight. Thank you to Harry Till. Thank you to Red Panda Koala. And thank you to everyone else who donated in the super chats tonight. Let me find out who else did. Man, it's been great. Here's the link to the after party if you guys want to join, and we can hang out and talk physics, and you can ask me anything afterwards. Again, no ads. Everything's free of charge. No pre-scripted, heavily edited, you know, highlight videos where I bleach my teeth out, and everything's off the cuff here, man, and we're all live and real and in your face with it. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I hope you guys come back soon. Take care. Have a great night. Peace.